Hi there. Welcome to the Struggling to Be Well podcast, episode number 4. If you haven't seen one of these before, basically read from my book, Struggling to Be Well, and different sections I've been reading from my childhood, from my complete mental breakdown, and also from my band years. I'll start today with what I usually do is start with reading from my breakdown and continue on from where we left off last time. Thank you very much. Time was warped for me. I had no concept of what day or time it was. I would find out later on. Psychiatrists use knowing date, time, and place as questions to assess someone's mental health state before going to a hospital. For a while, I walked all over Frankfurt, conscious of smelling strong, strange things in the air, making me change direction and walk in the opposite direction of the smell, only to be turned around again many times, running from the odors. So I had taste and smell hallucinations, as I was stating there, and it was like something that you don't smell normally, smells you can't describe. I couldn't describe anyway, and I couldn't eat the food because it would make me gag. I ended up at a bar downtown and stood in front for a little while, too afraid to go in. A young woman came out eventually and asked me why I was standing there. I really didn't say much to her. I really didn't know how to answer. I just moved on. I took several taxis all over the place back to the airport twice or more, but each time leaving, getting another cab and going downtown. I arrived in the outskirts of the city at a hotel recommended by a cab driver, got out, but was too afraid to go in. Hailing another cab, I finally went back downtown. That evening, I continued to pace back and forth, in and out of the train station for hours on end, finally collapsing in front of it. Someone called an ambulance. I was semi-conscious at the time, and they put some smelling salts under my nose to bring me around. This made me choke. They put me in an ambulance, but while traveling toward the hospital, I tried to get the door of the moving vehicle open to jump out. So I was struggling with the attendant at that time. Pretty big guy. There was no way. I was weak from not eating and not sleeping, and he easily overpowered me. They put me trying to jump out. The attendant fought with me, keeping me down, and told me that he was stronger than I was, and he was, keeping his arm on my throat till we got to the hospital. They took me to a psychiatric hospital where they restrained me, tying my hands and feet to a bed in the ward hallway. That night, indignant, I was calling out to them to free my hands and feet. An orderly released one hand and one foot, leaving me again. I wasn't happy with that, so I continued yelling and defiantly tried to push the bed up and down the hall along the side. One of the orderlies came up to me, sticking a needle into my butt cheek, and I was knocked out like a light. The next morning, upon awaking, I opened my eyes to find two professional-looking men at my bedside. I would later find out it was a judge and a lawyer who were going to decide if I needed to continue to be detained in the hospital. So this is in Frankfurt, Germany, and I'd never been there before. So at that point, before I was admitted to the hospital, I'd been just walking the street and aimlessly walking the street, not knowing where I was anymore, even though I figured I was in Frankfurt, but I thought I was somewhere else. Since I couldn't talk from the medication they had given me the evening before, of course they decided that I was unfit to leave. Eventually that day, they took the straps off my hands and feet, and feeling so afraid of my situation, I took off running as fast as I could, full force into the locked main door, trying to get out, where I collapsed on the floor. I thought I could pass right through the door like a ghost. They helped me back to bed in the main hall and told me to just lie there and relax, which I did. One of the questions the doctor asked me was if I had taken some kind of drug. He was obviously trying to find out if I had a bad reaction, since I wasn't saying much, eventually figuring that I had a form of psychosis. After a few days, I was set up with a bed in one of the side rooms, sharing the room with two other patients. Because of my mental state, all I could do was lay in bed all day. At first, even after being offered the bottled water, which everyone else was drinking, I was only drinking the tap water. The water was not tasting normal to me. One of the non-English speaking orderlies motioned for me to come to the sink. He pointed at the sink and made a grimace, and then pointed to a bottle of water and put his arm up to show a muscle. So I got the message. The sink water was polluted and the bottled water was safe to drink. I started drinking the bottled water. One night, one of my roommates was talking loudly with someone else in our room as I was trying to sleep. I asked him to go outside of the room, to which he responded, "Do you want something here?" while putting his fist to his face. I said, "You're going to hit me for nothing?" He replied, "Because I am nothing." I felt bad that he really believed he was unworthy and nothing, very similar to what I said and believed in Toronto. I didn't have much communication with the other 20 or so patients on the ward, as they were all speaking German and I was feeling somewhat intimidated and lost. After several days, I was allowed to go down to the stairs at the back of the ward to what they called the garden, which had a little patch of grass, a park bench, and a few little birds landing in and out. And it was no garden, it was just like basically just a little seating area, but they called it a garden. It was a very humble garden with high barbed wire fence, but I was grateful to at least see some sunshine. By this time, Dr. Nispel, the very kind psychiatrist who was seeing me, told me that the hospital had contacted the Canadian consulate, who in turn got in touch with my parents. My dad had no choice but to come to Germany to pick me up and bring me to Canada. I'd already been in the hospital for 10 days, had been evaluated, and they were obliged to release me to the care of my father. The day my dad arrived, we got a hotel room for the night. When we arrived at the airport the next morning, I was still feeling unwell from the medication I was prescribed. At this point, all I could do was lay down and stay in a ball. It was not well at all. I was just in a fetal position. We told the staff at the airport that I was very sick, and they agreed to let me go down into the pilot's lounge where I could lay down. They put Dad and I in a shuttle trolley and took us through the airport with the lady driving it intermittently saying, "Achtung, Achtung," to get everyone's attention that we were coming through. Once in the lounge, one of the flight attendants asked me what was wrong with me, and I just said, "I don't want to talk about it," as it was really none of her business. I was so ill I couldn't walk around. The only thing I could do was lay down on a bench in a fetal position and try and keep my thoughts positive. The next day, after we got back to Thunder Bay, I went to see a psychiatrist. I told him which medication I was on, and that's when he told me it was not available in North America or used here. This doctor did not prescribe any medication at first, and I went home to my parents, where I continued to work at the greenhouses for a while. Since I was laying in bed most of the day, a major saving grace for me along with my parents during this time was our dog, a big black female standard poodle named Pom Pom. She would come downstairs as soon as my parents would go out for a bit and either lay in the bed with me or crawl under until they came home. I found that to be very comforting. So I guess now I'll read a little bit also of my childhood and the band years when I was a youth, and continue on from there. At another gig, we were playing a very fast song where the dancers were on the same level as the stage. They were whipping each other around. I wasn't watching, and next thing I knew, I got the surprise of being under my drums with a shocked lady on top of the pile. Both a little startled, we helped each other up. She said she'd pay for any damage, which at first there didn't appear to be any because of the lack of good lighting in the bar. I told her not to worry about it, a few days later noticing a big crack in one of the tom-toms. These red drums were made of acrylic, so I used a little crazy glue, fixing it up almost like new. When we played in Brandon, Manitoba, not far from Winnipeg, I met Ding, a Malaysian woman who was 3 years older than me. We hit it off well and hung out together for 3 weeks while our band was playing at the bar. On the last day of our gig, she was in my room and said to me, "I'm coming with you." I asked her what she meant, and she said, "I'm quitting my studies at the university and coming with you." She replied. I agreed with her plan, unfortunately for her and her studies. I was very young and immature at the time and didn't understand the ramifications of what she had done by coming with me. Her family was not happy, and after traveling with me for several weeks, her sister told her on the phone that she had to come back to Manitoba, having violated being sponsored in Canada. I was very worried about what might happen to Ding and recommended that she return. After further conversations with her sister, Ding told me that it would be better if she just went back to Malaysia via Winnipeg, Manitoba. I felt terrible about the situation I had put her in. Ray, the sax player, and I ended up quitting the band and went to Winnipeg to look for work, bringing Ding with us on a bus. I didn't even have the courage to go to the airport with her. We said our goodbyes in Winnipeg at the hotel Ray and I were staying at. She left in a cab, and that's the last time I ever saw her. We kept in touch for about 6 months. I sent her a letter telling her when she gets back to Canada on her own, maybe we could get a place together. And I never heard from her again. I had tried many times over the years to contact her, always feeling quite a bit of guilt and wanted to know that things turned out well for her, but I never got a reply. I hope that life treated her well, even though she had left her studies. Her family owned a large sugar factory in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, so they may have been able to help her out financially. Ray and I stayed in Winnipeg for about a week or so looking for a gig, but we couldn't find a full-time band that was looking for a drummer or saxophonist. He offered to take me to Toronto, where he was renting a room in an apartment with some friends of his, a couple named Rick and Brenda. Coming from a small town, and even though the biggest city I'd been in at that point was Winnipeg, I decided to take him up on his offer and go. I didn't know what to expect. We left for Toronto on a bus arriving on that summer evening after traveling for about 28 hours. A few hours after settling in the apartment in Scarborough, a suburb of Toronto, Rick, who I thought looked like a beatnik with his black stringy long hair and beard, arrived home from work. He looked me over as if to ask, "What are you doing here?" Especially since I was sitting in his captain's chair. Ray quietly told me, "That's Rick's chair." So naive and wondering what the big deal was, I got out of the chair and turned in early that night, sleeping on the floor, Ray on a piece of foam, knowing that I wasn't exactly welcome with open arms. The next day in my new city, I decided I was going to go to the entertainer's contact service, which was located uptown. I could see the CN Tower building downtown from the window of the apartment and thought it didn't look too far. Wide-eyed and still experienced in a big city, I started out that day walking, not realizing that uptown was about 10 miles away. I kept asking people along the way how far the address I was heading to was. Some would say, "You're walking it? Why don't you just take the bus?" Undaunted, I kept going, arriving hours later and signing up for the service. I auditioned for a couple of bands through them, but never did get any work, having had better success over the years, putting my own ad in the paper in the dramatic musical talent section of the Toronto Star, where I could be very specific about what I was looking for. Several days after my arrival, I was told by Rick that I couldn't stay there any longer and would have to leave. Rick and his wife Brenda weren't happy at all with my being there. Feeling so unwanted, I called the bass player from Gord's band, this is the band I worked with previous, and quit, and asked him if I could stay at his place. The answer was emphatically no. Coming from a small town and being naive, I assumed that everybody was going to look after me. A few days later, after talking to Rick and Brenda about it for a while, they did agree to let me stay. Very relieved, I was able to buy my own humble piece of foam and not be sleeping on the hard floor anymore. The sax player moved out a year later, with me staying on till about 1981. During my stay, Rick owned a pile of different types of guns and ammo, so I made sure I always paid my rent on time. Late one night, he took me downtown in a souped-up 1927 Model T Ford. Heading south down Yonge Street on the main strip, all eyes were on us and the car as we drove by. Rick floored it. At first, the car went left a little bit, and then right a little bit, and then straight ahead like a rocket for about 6 blocks. Man, that car was fast. Rick obviously was not worried if the police would see it. During my first 6 months while living at the apartment, I took a job at Zing Burger, a local eatery. Before I got the job, I was broke. I was spending a lot of time in bed rocking myself and hadn't eaten for several days. Every day I would look at the classifieds in the newspaper with every intention of applying for work, but mentally I just couldn't do it, even showing up at businesses to apply, but not going inside. One day I went into Zing Burger to buy something to drink with a little bit of cash I had and struck up a conversation with Len, one of the young cooks. In the conversation I told him I didn't have money for food and had not eaten for a while. I was just telling him what was going on. I wasn't trying to get a free meal. But out of the kindnesses of his heart, he made me a free steak sandwich, which I devoured. I was very thankful. A few days later, I saw the help wanted sign in Zing Burger's window, applied, and got hired. Thank you very much for checking out my podcast. I'd like to invite you to future podcasts. If you're interested, please subscribe and like my link on YouTube. And just want to let you know my book, Struggling to Be Well, is available on Amazon as well. If you click the link on Amazon or on Instagram, where the Linktree link is, it'll take you to all my links, where there is my music, my artwork, and books as well. So thank you very much, and I hope you have a great day and look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.